Well, hello everyone and welcome to another Larry's Orchid Growing Guide. Today we're going to be doing a growing guide specifically on Cattleya Alliance orchids. So I think you all are going to love this episode, so kick back your feet and hopefully you learn something new. So today in this growing guide we're going to be covering a few things. We're going to be covering light, temperature, humidity, fertilizing, repotting, and just a few other tips and tricks to growing your orchids properly. So the first thing that everyone always asks is light. Light is the most important thing when growing an orchid because without enough of it, it won't flower, and too much of it, you're going to find your leaves are burning. The ideal amount is about 50 to 70% light exposure. So a shaded south-facing window is going to be ideal. We always recommend putting shears in front of your window or some form of blind to kind of filter the light. That way you're not having direct, strong sunlight right on your leaves. And you're going to notice that the leaves are going to be kind of a medium green color, kind of like almost a little bit darker than a lime green. A very dark green means that they're not getting enough light. And if they're starting to look burned, that means they're getting a little bit too much light. So you want to have kind of a pleasant median in between the both. So then the next thing we're going to talk about is fertilizing. Now when you fertilize your orchid, you want to use an orchid-specific fertilizer. We cannot stress this enough. So many people will just use any old fertilizer and they find that it absolutely kills the plant. That's because there are very specific requirements when growing orchids. Specifically, they love a high nitrogen count fertilizer. Here at Larry's Orchids, we do sell a lot of orchid-specific fertilizers, and specifically the ones we really love are these ones right here. These are the Better Grow brands here. They have a bloom booster and just an overall orchid mix here. This one right here is the bloom booster, and you're going to notice that with the bloom booster it has a higher phosphorus count. That's the middle number. It's 11, 35, 15. So you're only going to want to use this when it's getting ready to bloom, and that's actually before it goes into sheath, because of the fact once it goes into sheath, it's actually already forming its flower. So there's really no point in using this. So that's probably the only time you'd want to use a bloom booster. Now, just as an overall fertilizer, you're going to want to use the Better Grow mixture here. This is a 2014-13, and this is going to be your orchid fertilizer of choice, and that's going to do so good for you that, that you won't find anything better. This is what we use here in-house as well. And you also have this Better Grow. It's a controlled fertilizer, so if you're apt to forget to fertilize or you don't like to monitor when to fertilize your plants and stuff, this is going to be the trick for you. This is a very efficient way of fertilizing, and it also takes the guesswork out because it's a slow release fertilizer, but this is 11, 11, 18, so it's not as strong of numbers, so you're not going to see as fast results. But for a long period feeding, maybe if you're going on vacation or something and someone's taking care of your house, it's a very good way to ensure that your plant's going to continue to grow for you over that course of time. All right, so now we're going to talk about watering and how much water to give it. So when it comes to watering your Cattleya orchids, they can actually absorb water in two different ways. One is through humidity in the air. So if you have just a greenhouse or a very humid growing environment, they can absorb water that way as well. But I wouldn't always count on that being the surefire way to make sure your orchids get water. I would also recommend direct watering, as always. You want to direct water in your growing medium because that's going to have the most root mass, and that's where the majority of your water is going to be absorbed. Now when it comes to watering, you do want a well-draining potting mix, simply because the water should never be very close to the roots for a prolonged period of time. You want it to drain through, and that way you don't have root rot. Another thing is when you water, there should always be a schedule, but that schedule is very hard for us to tell you when to water, simply because the growing conditions can vary so much from place to place. When you have it in a window that's very sunny, that sunlight's going to evaporate a lot faster than some place that gets a little bit more shade than the one in the window. Also, if you have it in a drafty spot where air is passing over your growing medium pretty regularly, that's going to evaporate faster than some place that doesn't have it. So you really have to gauge on how your growing medium is based on your own observations. So the next thing we're going to talk about is temperature. The temperature should vary when growing Cattleya orchids about 15 to 20 degrees. So you're going to want to aim for about 60 degrees at night and then around 80 degrees during the day. That's ideal. But you can also go 55 degrees and 75 degrees. That's going to be fine as well. As long as you have that temperature variance, your orchids are going to do excellent. Simply because when they're normally growing, they get a cool night breeze that comes off the ocean, and it will actually cool the leaves and cool the plant down. So you're trying to just replicate that natural environment as much as possible so that it can grow as best as possible for you. Now the last thing we're going to talk about is humidity. When it comes to humidity, you want to aim for higher humidity percentages as much as possible. Around 80% humidity is going to be so ideal that your orchids won't know what to do with themselves. But if you find yourself growing at about 50% humidity, they can survive, but they won't do as good as something at about 80% humidity. You have to remember that they are tropical, and tropical environments do get high humidity. So with that high humidity, you're going to want to replicate that in your growing environment as well if you want them to do as good as possible. And finally, you probably all are wondering about the repotting. The repotting video is actually another video that we decided to do simply because there's no way we could fit it all in one episode, and there's a lot of different tips and tricks when it comes to repotting specifically that we could not fit on this episode. So with you in mind, we had a second video. It's in the description box below if you want the link, or I'll post an annotation somewhere along the bottom here where you can click it and it'll direct you right to that video, because again, we had you in mind, and that always seems to come up in a lot of questions, how to repot your Cattleya orchids. So that video is up there for you. Hopefully you enjoyed as well. Now, as always, everything you have seen on this episode, whether it be the Better Grow orchid fertilizer or the Cattleya orchids themselves, we do have seedlings and more mature plants that are blooming size. Whatever fits your growing style is going to be great. I will say though that the seedlings are the best buy because you get the most bang for your buck, and also they're going to give you that full challenge and the delight of growing an orchid from seedling to bloom, which is always an excellent achievement. In my opinion, I think it's one of the best things about growing orchids is growing them from a seedling. But if you want something that's going to look pretty very quick for you, we have a blooming size orchid for you as well. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please click the subscribe button. That way you can stay up to date on all the other cool things we're doing on this channel. And if you have any friends that are growing Cattleya orchids, make sure to share this video with them because I think they will enjoy it as well. And as always, this is Luke from Larry's Orchids, thanking you and reminding you that we are the #1 stop for all your orchid and tropical needs. Thank you very much. Have a great day.